Things to remember for lino cutter safety. In order to check out a lino cutter, so this is a lino cutter, you have to have your student ID or your MacBook. And you're going to give that to the teacher, and the teacher will then give you a lino cutter. You can only have one lino cutter at a time. So if you're using the lino cutters and you figure out that you need to switch sizes, you'll bring the lino cutter that you're working with up and trade it out with the teacher, and the teacher will give you another size. You may not put your lino cutters back in the box at any time. You have to hand it to the teacher. You may not swap out the lino cutters. You have to have the teacher do it for you, okay? When you start to cut, you want to make sure that your printing plate is on one of the metal trays. And the great thing about these trays is that they have a little loop here, or a lip, that fits on the edge of the table, so it helps to hold it in place so it's not sliding around on you. It also has a little metal piece on this edge here, so if like I lose control as I'm cutting, it keeps my blade from going too far. Okay, so the next thing you want to keep in mind, you always keep the lino cutter pointed away from you. You never cut towards yourself. That's a no-no. You always want to cut away from yourself, so that way you don't slip and accidentally cut your hand with the lino cutter. You want to make sure that the edge you're carving is always furthest away from you, so closest to this raised edge. You want to make sure that the blade is securely fastened, so just give that a little twist to make sure it's not moving. And then you're going to only cut your linoleum plate. These are not to be used for any other purpose. Okay? Remember, if you are messing around with the lino cutter, if you point it at somebody else, if you're playing around with it, you can end up with severe consequences for this. Not limited to an office referral, an alternative project. You no longer get to do the project. So make sure that you are treating it as an art tool and using it as instructed. And keep in mind how you work with these tools determine what other art materials you're allowed to work with for future projects. Make sure you do not carve or cut into the tabletop. Another thing you want to be careful about as you're carving, you don't want to carve too deep so that you carve through your printing plate, but you want to carve enough to remove it so that the ink doesn't catch those areas. There are multiple sizes. 1 is the smallest, 5 is the largest. So when you go to see the teacher will oftentimes ask you what size you want to work with. You'll tell them, and then the teacher will get you that lino cutter and you can start carving. Now my recommendation when you carve, like I said, carve away from yourself. So I'm holding the base here. I'm gonna take my lino cutter, and I usually start with like a 2 or a 3. I find those easier to work with than a 1, but that's my personal preference. So, and I always put my little scraps here on my metal tray, because then at the end I can just take them straight to the trash can. So I always cut along the edge of my object first, so that way I've got a nice clean edge. And again, you want to be careful as you're cutting. There is no way to put this material back. Okay, so once you remove, this is a subtractive method. We're removing little pieces. Notice I'm not cutting toward my hand. I'm trying to be extra careful. But once you remove those pieces, they're gone. And you'll notice sometimes I'll even rotate my plate as I'm cutting it to keep the lino cutter from pointing towards myself. So I've got a nice start here. So that's when I would go up to a larger size. So I'm going to grab a 4 now. I could maybe even grab a 5. And now I'm going to really start taking out some of those larger areas that I no longer need. So you'll notice as I'm getting lower into my printing plate, you can see some different colors starting to show. It's a little bit redder. That's a sign that I'm removing that top surface. Now that's not always the case, but these particular plates that I'm working with today, you'll notice there's a red line. That's a good level to carve down to. So if you're still seeing that same color as the top surface, there's a chance that you haven't carved deep enough and those little pieces will show up in your print. So you want to take the time to remove till you get to that next layer. This might not look the prettiest, and that's okay. We just want to make sure that we are removing enough and we have clean enough edges that it prints the way that you want it to print. I personally think rounded shapes are the hardest to carve, so that's why I encourage you not to go too small. I'm hoping that I've removed enough here from around these circles that they'll print like circles. Another thing to watch for, the edges here, it tends to want to hold on to those a little bit more, so you really have to carve out those pieces along the edge. And see, I started with too big of one, so it ended up gouging a bigger area than I wanted there. I'm hoping that won't affect my design. Again, like here's this little piece that doesn't want to go away, so I turn it and I carve from a different angle to get rid of that. I think I've probably removed enough to test it out. When you are done carving, what you need to do is you will take your lino cutter, check it back in with the teacher. That's the first step. So you'll check it in with the teacher, and the teacher will trade you back your ID or your MacBook, and then you will take and put your printing plate in your locker. You don't want to lose it. You might even put your name on the back in Sharpie. And then you're going to take all your little extra pieces here, keep them on your metal tray, take the tray over to the trash and dump it, and then go set the tray where it is located in the classroom.